In the golden hush of a late autumn afternoon, the rural hills of Pennsylvania stood still, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Along the winding road that led to St. Matthew's Orphanage, people had gathered in reverent silence. No banners, no fanfare, just quiet awe as the convoy of black sedans crept slowly through the iron gates that had once guarded a very different life. The world knew him as Pope Leo XIV, the gentle reformist pontiff who had breathed compassion into the Vatican. But here, on this soil, he was simply Michael Brennan. And today, for the first time in over 60 years, he had come home. Before we continue this powerful journey of memory, healing, and truth, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Stories like this are rare, and we bring them to you with care, depth, and emotion. Michael had no memory of his arrival at the orphanage. He was told he'd been found wrapped in a wool blanket on the front steps one rainy night, just 4 days old. No note, no name. Just a silver cross tucked into the folds of cloth, now displayed in a Vatican archive. Raised within stone walls and creaky floors, Michael grew up a quiet boy with curious eyes and 1,000 unspoken questions. St. Matthew's wasn't cruel, but it wasn't soft either. It was a place of rigid schedules and limited affection, where discipline was order and order was survival. But amid the austerity, one light shone. Sister Agnes. She was not like the others. While most of the staff maintained a cold distance, Sister Agnes saw Michael, truly saw him. She noticed how he lingered by the window when it rained, how he flinched at sudden noises, how he avoided eye contact but craved connection. She would find reasons to let him stay in the chapel longer, where he felt safest. She taught him to read using the Psalms, her voice a gentle river smoothing the jagged edges of his world. To the other boys, he was odd. He read too much, spoke too little, and refused to fight. They called him Ghost Boy, and he would sometimes hide in the storage room for hours just to avoid their jabs. But in solitude, Michael began to form a bond, not with other children but with something deeper, a presence he felt in the chapel's silence, a voice that didn't speak in words but in comfort. It wasn't long before he began whispering to it, like a friend. One night, after a particularly harsh beating by an older boy, Michael snuck into the chapel, blood on his lip, tears soaking his sleeves. He curled up beneath the altar, trying not to cry too loud. Minutes passed before soft footsteps approached. Sister Agnes sat beside him, cradled his small head in her lap, and said, "You are not broken, child. You are becoming." That moment would remain etched in his memory forever. Years would pass and he would grow taller, stronger, quieter still. But inside him, something had been lit. A longing, a purpose, though he could not yet name it. He didn't know then that the path he would walk would lead through seminaries, cities, and eventually, cathedrals. All he knew was that he wanted to make others feel what Sister Agnes had made him feel, seen, heard, and loved. And now, as his papal ring glinted in the waning light, Michael Brennan crossed the threshold of St. Matthew's once more, no longer the invisible boy, but the shepherd of millions, come back to the place where it had all begun. Life at St. Matthew's wasn't cruel in a way that left scars visible to the eye. It was colder, quieter. A kind of silence that wrapped itself around a child's thoughts, whispering doubts where there should have been warmth. For Michael, the silence grew heavier with each passing year. He was unlike the other boys, not because he chose to be, but because something in him reached for things they couldn't see. While others chased and shouted in the muddy yard, Michael stayed by the chapel's edge, eyes fixed on the stained glass angels above. He didn't understand it then, but something in him was listening, even before he had the words for faith. The other children noticed his difference quickly. Children have a cruel instinct for weakness, and Michael's quiet made him an easy target. They mocked his silence, took his food, and tripped him when the sisters weren't watching. Most wounds he could hide, some he couldn't, but he never told, he never ran. Instead, he kept returning to the one place where his soul could breathe, the chapel. That sanctuary was where his questions lived. Why had his parents left him? Why did no one come back? Why did God stay silent? He didn't yet understand that silence was often the place where God did his deepest work. It was on one of those cold evenings, after a scuffle in the dormitory had left his arm bruised and his spirit crumbling, that he sat cross-legged on the chapel floor and began to speak, not to a statue, not to the ceiling, but to something within the quiet. "If you're there, do you see me?" he whispered. "Because I'm tired of being invisible." Behind him, Sister Agnes stood unnoticed, holding a blanket she had come to offer. She didn't interrupt, she listened. Then she knelt beside him and simply said, "He sees you, Michael. I promise you, he does." That was the first moment something shifted. In the years that followed, Michael's questions deepened. He read voraciously, scripture, saints' lives, anything he could find in the small orphanage library. He started waking up before the others to sit alone in the chapel's pews. He wasn't trying to be holy, he was just searching for meaning in a world that had started with absence. Then came the tragedy. One of the younger boys, Daniel, had followed Michael to the frozen creek behind the orphanage one December afternoon. Michael had warned him to stay back, but Daniel slipped. The ice gave way. By the time help arrived, it was too late. Michael never forgot the sound of Sister Agnes's scream. He never forgot the way the other boys looked at him afterward, not with cruelty this time, but with grief and blame. He stopped speaking altogether for a week. Alone in the chapel, he pounded his fists on the floor, sobbing, "Why? Why him and not me?" Sister Agnes came to him, arms open, voice unshaken. "You are still here because your story isn't finished. Let Daniel's light become your vow." And from that grief, a vow was born. Michael decided, quietly, solemnly, that he would never let another soul feel unseen or unloved if he could help it. He didn't speak of his decision to anyone, but it shaped every breath afterward. At 13, while the others dreamed of escape or rebellion, Michael dreamed of becoming a servant, not a hero, not a priest. Just someone who healed where others had hurt. It was a vow he would keep, even when the world had forgotten where he came from. The seminary was a world unlike anything Michael Brennan had ever known. He arrived at 18 with nothing but a worn Bible, a scholarship letter, and the quiet conviction born from years of prayer and pain. The other seminarians came from parishes and private schools, their families proud and present. Michael came from silence, from shadows, from an orphanage chapel in the Pennsylvania hills. He was out of place in every way. At first, the structure comforted him. Morning prayer, lectures, long hours in the library. It was a rhythm he understood. But soon, the subtle divides emerged. He didn't speak with eloquence. He didn't quote Latin. And when asked about his family, he simply said, "I was raised by the church." Some admired his humility. Others saw only an outsider with a tragic past. The tests were not just academic. They were emotional, spiritual. One professor questioned whether Michael's desire for priesthood was born from genuine faith or a desire to escape his pain. The question stung more than it should have. That night, Michael fasted in silence and prayed until dawn. He asked God not to take away his pain, but to use it, to shape it, to make it mean something. By the end of his second year, something had shifted. His empathy, once seen as odd, became his greatest strength. When fellow students faced personal crises, it was Michael they came to. Not because he had answers, but because he listened without judgment. Because he remembered what it was to feel invisible. At 25, he was ordained a priest. There was no family in the pews, no father's embrace, no mother's tears. But Sister Agnes was there, old, frail, smiling through watery eyes. After the ceremony, she whispered, "Now you begin." And begin he did. His first assignment took him to a struggling parish in Detroit. The neighborhood was poor, riddled with crime and distrust. Many had stopped attending Mass. Michael didn't try to convert them with doctrine. He listened, he walked the streets. He sat with addicts, comforted widows, and held the hands of dying men no one else visited. He spoke little, but his presence spoke volumes. Word of his work spread. He was transferred again, first to El Salvador, then later to Sudan. Each place broke and remade him. He stood beside families who had lost everything, celebrated Mass in bombed-out buildings, and baptized children under skies filled with smoke. Through it all he kept his vow, to see the unseen, to love the unloved. Years passed. promotions came. He was named bishop, then archbishop, but he remained simple in dress, unshaken in humility. When appointed to the Vatican's Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, many expected him to change. He didn't. He walked to work, declined chauffeurs, ate with janitors and washed the feet of prisoners on Holy Thursday. And then, without seeking it, came the call. The conclave had begun after the unexpected resignation of Pope Clement VIII. Michael was in Rome, respected but not prominent. When the white smoke rose, no one imagined it signaled his election, but it did. On the balcony of St. Peter's, when he stepped forward and announced his papal name, Leo XIV, there was a pause across the square. Then thunderous applause. He was the orphan pope. The priest of the poor, a shepherd who remembered being a sheep, and yet, even with the weight of the papacy upon him, one place called louder than the rest. A memory, distant but alive. A vow unfulfilled. A door he had yet to walk through again. That door was in Pennsylvania. The gates of St. Matthew's groaned open, and for a heartbeat, time itself seemed to hesitate. Pope Leo XIV, Michael Brennan, stepped onto the gravel path he had once walked as a barefoot boy. His papal garments were simple, ivory robes that swayed softly in the wind, but his eyes, those were heavy with memories. The air smelled of pine and old stone. Nothing and everything had changed. A hush had settled over the gathered crowd. Staff, current orphans, clergy, and former residents lined the path. Some clutched rosaries, others handkerchiefs. Few knew what to expect. Even fewer understood the depth of what was about to unfold. Michael walked slowly, touching the railings he had once clung to as a child. He paused in front of the chapel. The paint was fresher now, the doors replaced. But the threshold remained, the same place he had sat bloodied and broken so many years ago. He entered in silence, eyes sweeping across the pews, settling on the altar. He took a breath and turned to face those inside. "I do not come to you today as the Bishop of Rome," he began, his voice warm but unsteady. "I come as a boy who was abandoned here, a child who cried alone in these pews. I come as Michael." A ripple moved through the room, emotion thick, reverent. He continued, "This place did not just raise me. It taught me what love can look like when the world forgets you. It taught me what hope is when there is no one left to speak your name. In this chapel I learned to hear God, not in thunder or triumph, but in silence and smallness." He paused, his gaze settling on the front row, where children sat with wide, searching eyes. "I know what it is to feel invisible. I know what it is to ache for answers. I know the weight of wondering why you were left behind, and I want you to hear me now. God has never stopped seeing you. You are not forgotten. You are not abandoned. You are becoming." His words weren't grand, they were true. And in their truth, the room began to shift. Some children cried openly. Staff members lowered their heads. Even the most hardened among them felt something loosen in their chest. I remember a sister here who told me once, "You are not broken, you are becoming." Her name was Agnes. She saw me before I saw myself. If I am anything today, if I wear this white robe and carry this name, it is because she chose to believe in a boy who had no name of his own. He took another breath. His voice trembled. "I came here not to bless this place, but to be blessed by it once more. Because this is where my faith began. Not in Rome, not in a cathedral. But here, in a place where I first asked God if he saw me." He looked around the chapel, now filled with quiet tears. "This place is holy, not because of who I became, but because of who I was when I was here. A child, lost and searching. And I want each of you to know, wherever you are in your journey, you are already loved. Already seen." He stepped down from the altar, moving slowly through the pews, placing a hand gently on each child's head as he passed. It wasn't ceremony, it wasn't spectacle. It was the return of a boy to the only home he'd ever known, and the echo of a promise fulfilled. The chapel gradually emptied, but Michael remained. A gentle light filtered through the stained glass windows, casting colors across the worn wooden floor. The silence was not empty, it was full, alive with memory. A young sister approached quietly, her hands clasped in front of her. "Your Holiness," she began, but he raised a hand gently. "Michael," he said, "please." She nodded and offered to guide him to the small cemetery behind the chapel. The path was familiar in a way that made his chest tighten. With each step, the weight of years grew heavier, not from regret, but from remembrance. There, beneath a modest headstone shaded by an oak, lay Sister Agnes. The stone read simply, "Sister Agnes Margaret, she believed in small miracles." Michael knelt without ceremony. He placed a hand on the grass and closed his eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "for leaving, for taking so long, for never saying goodbye." He remained there for a long time, the wind moving gently through the trees above. When he finally stood, there was no more sorrow, only peace. Later that day, in the orphanage's modest dining hall, he gathered with staff and children once more. His voice, though calm, carried with it something resolute. "This place," he began, "is more than memory. It is a foundation. For too long it has struggled. Too many places like it are forgotten. But I remember. And today, I make this vow." He paused, looking around at the faces of wonder and hope. "A new wing will be built here, a school, a library, a space for healing. It will bear the name of Sister Agnes, and it will be funded entirely by the Church, not as charity but as a debt long owed. The children here will know they are not alone. They will know they matter." Applause broke the silence. Some clapped, others wept. One of the older boys stood and asked, "Will you come back again?" Michael smiled softly. "I never really left." As the day drew to a close, he walked through the dormitories one last time. He paused by the old staircase where he had once fallen and split his lip. He touched the wall by the dining hall, where Sister Agnes had taped his first drawing. Everything had changed, but in some ways everything had stayed the same. At the gate, as his convoy waited, Michael turned for one final look. The orphanage stood bathed in golden light. Not a palace, not a cathedral, but sacred ground. He whispered, "Thank you," and crossed the threshold once more. In Rome, he would continue his mission, but in his heart, the soil of Pennsylvania had reclaimed him. Not as Pope Leo XIII, but as Michael Brennan, the child who once asked the silence if he mattered, and who now answered that question for others every single day. His final words to the gathered press before departing were quiet, but firm. "The measure of any church is not in its walls, but in how it loves its least." And with that, he was gone. But the legacy remained. The chapel's benches would hold new children, the garden would grow again, and the wing named for Sister Agnes would rise like a hymn of memory and promise. If this story moved you, if Michael's journey from invisible child to shepherd of millions touched something in your soul, subscribe to our channel. We bring you stories that remind us of what truly matters. And don't miss the next video now on your screen. An unforgettable story of hope, courage, and the power of quiet faith.